Okay, so I did double check. And we do have day 11, Bhishma Pitama fell. Day 13 is when Abhimanyu was killed. Day 14 is Jayadratha was killed. And they didn't stop fighting. They went into the night. In fact, they were fighting even on day, even day 14 for sure, they fought into the night. And that's when Gatakach got really strong because Asuras get stronger at night, although he was already very strong and he was already putting up a really good fight. And so he was killed somewhere between day 14 and 15. I'm not sure if it was late at night or earlier in the day, but they only slept for 2 hours that night. And it was finally, everyone was fighting, so exhausted, they didn't even know who they were fighting anymore. And at one point, I think it was Arjuna who called a truce and said that we need to stop, everyone is too tired. And so everyone did stop, and Duryodhana got really angry. And why are they listening and why are they stopping? But interestingly, that Duryodhana wasn't fighting, so he wasn't as exhausted. But people literally sat down where they were. So if they were fighting with each other, both people just sat down and fell asleep. And if they were that exhausted, and usually in the morning, they would wake up in their camps, right? But this time they had just all fallen asleep. So everyone's waking up, and you're waking up like on the enemy territory, or the waking up in front of the person that you were fighting with last night. And then everyone regrouped. And Duryodhana was really at this point aggravating Dronacharya. So Dronacharya had been fighting the whole night and fighting very effectively. And remember that Duryodhana's taunts were very piercing. You know, some people's words when they speak can be particularly cruel or sharp, right? That tongue is very, very sharp. So at some point in the evening, in day 14, morning of day 15, when Duryodhana is talking, Dronacharya kind of thinks, enough. Like, why am I even doing this? And so he even tells Duryodhana that, you've been trained, you a warrior, you want them dead, you keep saying you can do it, go fight. You go and accomplish everything that you were saying. And then in his head, and so this is an interesting thing that happens when we know we're going to die. It appears that most of us know we're going to die. And so day 15 is when Drona falls, and it starts already. He's remembering. And I spoke a little bit about this last week already, that Drona's fall was he wanted revenge against Drupada. Up until that point, he's fine. He wanted to provide for his son, that's fine. He went to ask for money, that's fine. He got angry also, that's fine. All these are human natural tendencies. But there's wanting revenge and this plotting revenge and this, what's the word? Festering. That's a non-Brahmin quality. It's a negative quality in anyone's heart, but some people aren't made out that way. They don't have that aptitude. And so we see that when Drona does get the kingdom, because Arjuna defeats Drupada in battle, he's now tired of hating. He's tired of having this sense of vengeance in his heart, and he wants it all to be over. And so already that shows you that it's not his personality. It was out of character. And when we act out of character, so like this happens, we get tired, we get more tired, we get, and so that's why he wasn't able to sustain that feeling in his heart, that sense of revenge and animosity that he felt to Drupada, because it wasn't his true nature. And then siding with Hastinapur and Duryodhana, again, wasn't his true nature. So as a teacher, you learn and you teach and you correct. And early on, Drona recognized this jealousy in Duryodhana's heart. Bhishmacharya didn't recognize it. Bhishma was a little bit blinded and, saw good qualities in Duryodhana, saw good qualities in the Pandavas and thought they all good kids. And as a grandfather, you can, sometimes that happens. You just think they all good kids. Okay, he's a little bit, this one's a little bit short-tempered or this one's a little bit spoiled. But then, when they all our kids, you're kind of like forgiving of it. But Drona recognized it very clearly. So, and Duryodhana was also very calculating. He would only say things that were appropriate in front of Bhishmacharya. Because, he knew where to butter his bread. He knew how to present himself in a way that was likable. And he knew how to get what he wanted. So and that to some extent he learned from his father, the Yudhishtira, because the Yudhishtira always said what was appropriate and what was correct, even if he didn't mean it. So he'd learned that. Duryodhana had learned that. And so to some extent, Bhishmacharya was fooled. He only realized much later on that Duryodhana was just way too jealous and way too greedy. But Drona had recognized this and he didn't do anything about it. And again, that goes against the nature of a teacher, like to guide the person in the right way. And maybe it was too much effort. Sometimes when you see someone being so calculating and manipulative and so powerful, and it's a very big battle to fight. You're fighting the Yudhishtira, who's the king. So Drona kind of like let it slide. And so Drona is now thinking of his whole life that, how did I get stuck doing this? And he's remembering all the times when he has failed to live up to what he himself considers to be righteous. And so the first is giving into revenge. And then the second is game of dice. He didn't do anything. He knew it was wrong and he didn't do anything. And so right now, when he's thinking back about it, he really repents that he didn't do anything. And he could have, he should have. And then this is one of life's worst tragedies, is that, so Drona is preparing for death, knowingly, unknowingly. He's preparing for his death. And so this is one of the things that happens. We flash back through our lives. And sometimes when we look back at our lives, we don't necessarily remember everything. And sometimes we remember. Game of dice is going to be one of those things that you remember. And this regret that we can have in our heart is horrible. It's what makes death the most painful for the person that's dying, and even for when the person has died. Right? So we'll see this later on when Yudhishtira finds out that Karna's his brother. He's tormented with regret that he didn't know. So when someone we love dies, this regret runs havoc in our heads. But even me, myself, preparing for my death, regret is one of the hardest things to face. And so, a lot of spirituality is exactly that, preparing for death. And so if I've, like now in Drona's case, if I've made a mistake, and so many of us do, so many of us make mistakes, small ones, big ones, then this journey of self-forgiveness is paramount. And, forgiving someone else is way easier than forgiving ourselves. But this journey of self-forgiveness actually only really we can do when there's this willingness in us to change. And Drona didn't quite have that. Like there's this regret that he has fallen from dharma. So he Drona's fall of dharma is not even that he joined adharma. It was he wasn't true to his own personality traits. He wasn't true to Brahmana nature. He gave in to weakness. Of course, for all of us, giving into to revenge and spite and bitterness is weakness. And for some of us, it's just all that worse because our hearts are softer. So when we see that he has this regret that he didn't, and he has this incredible regret that now he is fighting with Duryodhana, who's constantly tormenting him, and he's genuinely trying to do right by Duryodhana. And this is really the tragedy of it. He's genuinely trying to do right by Duryodhana. And he's really fought very well as a soldier on the battlefield. As a commander-in-chief, he's done a great job of looking after the army. And of course, Duryodhana has zero appreciation of this. And so now he has regret. He hates that he's in this position. And what does he do? He keeps fighting. But he keeps fighting in this very nonsensical way. And so this is where we can see a few things, right? So firstly, Duryodhana is Dronacharya is so upset. What would be the right emotion here? So there's guilt, there's regret, there's sadness, and there's anger. And it's interesting when we have a lot of emotions. Anger tends to take over. Yeah. And so when we have this cocktail of emotions, which often a lot of us will have, if anger's in the cocktail of emotions, suddenly everything just becomes driven by anger. The guilt becomes driven by anger, the regret becomes driven by anger, the sadness becomes driven by anger. And this anger initially is towards Duryodhana because Duryodhana keeps taunting. Then the anger is towards himself, that you're finding yourself in this predicament. But emotions are such things that they don't stay within the realm of reason. I'm angry with Duryodhana because he's taunting, that's logical, and I know what to do with it. Angry with myself because I didn't live up to what I want to do, that's logical, and I know what to do with it. But anger, then it just no more logic, and it's just free-floating anger, and you don't even know what you're angry with. And worst of all, Duryodhana's in the middle of a battlefield where they're fighting. And this kind of an environment is so conducive for anger because it's so violent already, the nature of what they have to do. And so Drona he loses the plot. He is killing so mercilessly, so just unreasonably. So Drona is charged with all the celestial weapons, right? And the rules of battle, he doesn't need to use celestial weapons on common soldiers, but he's using celestial weapons on common soldiers. I mean, he can kill these people without these celestial weapons. So using celestial weapons on them, it's like wasteful, and it's what's the right word? Merciless. Yeah, I can't think of any other word. It's just he's lost all sense of reason. He's lost all sense of what is meant to be dharma, what is right, what is fair, what is just, what is respectful. He's lost all of that, and he's killing brutally, so much so that the rishis appear in the sky. So Bharadwaj Rishi, Drona's father, Sage Vashishta, Sage Vashishta is from the Ramayana, huh? Like this is the Sapta Rishis. Like how? Also, you have to think that even Drona is in this position to be able to get darshan of the Sapta Rishis is something. And so they've stopped. And they appear in front of him and they tell him, you need to stop. This is unbecoming of you. Yeah. And you need to accept that your time is up. Now, who's telling him this? His father and the Sapta Rishis. Bharadwaj Rishi is there, Vashishta is there, Vishwamitra is there, Gautam Rishi is there. Like, these are great, great, great souls. And nobody else can see them except Krishna and Sanjaya. Remember, Sanjaya was given Divya Drishti. So Sanjaya can see them. Nobody else can see them. And so they've come literally just in front of Drona. And they've told him, you need to stop. And so also you have to remember that emotions get the better of us, and they've fought through the night. Like, they're exhausted. And this doesn't help when we are emotional and we are tired. It really doesn't help, because that emotion just gets, and that's why he's behaving in such an uncultured, unreasonable way, because his anger has just become free floating anger, and it's just turned into nonsensical violence. So when people see him in this mode, Arjuna tries to fight him. Yeah. Now, there's different kinds. Arjuna has always had incredible respect for Drona as a guru. Even we saw when he was after Jayadratha, he bows down to Drona and he does pradakshina and he leaves. He doesn't fight him, but he says, gurus are like fathers and they forgive. And so I'm not fighting you and I'm leaving. And then when Bhim comes, Bhim doesn't bow down. Bhim says, you stopped being my guru the minute you agreed to fight with Duryodhana. And so even now, so this is now day 15, when the Dronacharya is on this rampant violence spree, Arjuna tries to fight him genuinely, not half-heartedly, genuinely tries to fight, but Drona is very, very skilled. And so he's no easy match. And so at one point, Yudhishtira comes up to the chariot next to Arjuna and Krishna, and Yudhishtira says, something needs to be done. Yeah. And Krishna says, for as long as Drona has weapons in arms, he cannot be defeated. So Bhim says, and I think Satyaki and Drishtadyumna and everyone is gathered there. Drishtadyumna is definitely gathered there. And so I'd mentioned this last week. When Gatakach falls, Yudhishthira is furious and he says, I'm going to go and fight with Drona. And then Sage Vyasa comes and tells Yudhishthira to calm down. But Yudhishthira is still very clear that Drona needs to be killed and Karna needs to be killed. But right now it's Drona that's running this havoc. And so he's looking at Drona. And I'm not sure exactly who it was now, but Krishna said as long as his weapons are in arms, he cannot be killed. And so I think it's Bhim that says, then let's find another way. We need to get him to put down his weapons. And Krishna says, the only way he'll put down his weapons is if he thinks Ashwatthama, his son, is dead. And so if we could convince him Ashwatthama is dead. Now, Bhim doesn't even blink. Bhim runs and he knows that there's an elephant called Ashwatthama, and Bhim picks up the elephant and whirls him around and kills him on the spot, and then starts screaming on top of his voice, Ashwatthama is dead. Ashwatthama is dead. Ashwatthama is dead. Drona hears this. He hears Ashwatthama is dead. And he thinks it can't be true, because he himself has trained his son. He knows his son is a very efficient warrior. He can't be dead. And so he's not fooled so easily. But then now the rishis have also told him that his time is up. He in his head is so angry, and he has thought so many thoughts over this period of time where he's told Duryodhana, now you go fight, since you're saying everybody else is useless, you go do it yourself. And I've done my level best. And if you can't see it, you can't see it, then there's nothing more I can do. And it's my bad karma that I have ended up being here fighting on your side. And in his mind, he has pretty much said, no more. I'm not going to do it anymore. And then Bhim comes and says, Ashwatthama is dead. But he says, he reiterates what the rishis had said, even though Bhim didn't hear the rishis, huh? But Bhim says, what kind of Brahmana are you, where you have lost all sense of dharma? How can you be using celestial weapons on innocent people? Were you given these weapons and the skill and this knowledge to abuse? Like if you wanted to be a Kshatriya, then at least be a good Kshatriya. You're not being a good Kshatriya, because good Kshatriyas wouldn't use celestial weapons on innocent, harmless people. And if you were a good Kshatriya, you would have followed all the rules and you wouldn't have killed Abhimanyu the way you killed Abhimanyu. And my useless brother Arjuna still bows down to you as a guru, but you killed Abhimanyu. You have no right to be called a guru the way you have killed. And so Bhim's words, Bhim's also got a very harsh tongue. In fact, Duryodhana's tongue and Bhim's tongue are pretty much on par, huh? It's just that we like Bhim because he's a Pandava, so we tend to be a little bit more forgiving of him. But what's interesting is Bhim's very honest. Duryodhana is very manipulative. Bhim's not manipulative. His tongue is harsh because he is brutally honest. And so he says, you don't make a good Brahmana because you gave into revenge and you sought out wealth and kingdom and power. And even now, you are seeking out power. You're only trying to appease Duryodhana because of power, which is a truth. And so it pierces Drona's heart. Then he says, and you're not a good Kshatriya either. Like if you were going to give up Brahmana dharma and you were going to be a Kshatriya, then be true to Kshatriya dharma. But you're not a good Kshatriya either. And so Drona, you have failed on all accounts. Who's saying this? Bhim. And actually Duryodhana has never said that. He's indirectly insulted that, you're soft because you're a Brahmana, you're not so good as a Kshatriya. But he hasn't said it so crystal clear that you have failed on all accounts. You have failed as a Brahmana, you have failed as a Kshatriya, you have failed as a guru. And so don't expect me to have any kind of respect for you. And it's Arjuna's weakness that he has still got respect for you. Although credit to Arjuna, he did fight with all his might, and Drona did have all the defense. I mean, there's nothing Arjuna knows that Drona doesn't already know, because Drona's the teacher, right? And even though Arjuna has mastered a few more things than what Drona knows because of his tapasya charya, and he went on and he got all those different celestial weapons, Dronacharya can counter pretty much anything that Arjuna puts up. And so we know this is true because Krishna has said it, that he has got all the skill sets to defend himself at any given point in time. And then Bhim, after saying that, you basically, you're such a disappointment. And then, and all of this you did for Ashwatthama, but Ashwatthama is dead. You think, who are you fighting for now? You're fighting for Duryodhana? Really? You're fighting for Karna? Really? You don't like Karna, which was fact. Drona didn't like Karna. He did have some love for Duryodhana, but at this point in time, no. Because, it's like he had taken enough taunts and insults and fatigued, so fatigued. So basically Bhim is saying, so what are you doing this for? The only one person he would have been doing this for would be his son Ashwatthama, and Ashwatthama's dead. And then some flicker in his mind, and he looks up at Yudhishtira. Because Bhim saying Ashwatthama is dead Dronacharya is smart enough to know that Bhim could be doing this just as. And so see his presence of mind, like, really, with all his flaws, he had done enough tapas to have that level, that presence of intelligence to understand who's capable of what. Yeah. And so he looks at Yudhishthira. And at this point, remember I told you Yudhishthira had his chariot was next to Krishna and Arjuna's chariot. And when Krishna had suggested that they use this Ashwatthama is dead as a ploy to get Drona to put down his weapons, Arjuna is horrified. But Krishna looks at Arjuna at this point and says, don't you dare. And this much love that Arjuna has that he won't go against Krishna. And Krishna now says to Yudhishthira, O king, please save us. Only you now can destroy Drona. And then he quotes scripture. I don't know which scripture this is, but you would have all heard this scenario because it's Ethics 101. You know, when you go into an ethics class or a morality class, then the scenario is placed to you. If a murderer is running down the street and you see a person go right, and the murderer comes and says, which way did the person go? What are you going to do? Are you going to tell them which way the person went? Or are you going to lie? And so this is like, this is like one of those first moral dilemma scenarios that get given. And just about any moral ethics, whether it be religious or just morals, everyone will say you lie. Yeah. Lying is wrong, 100%. You save a life, you lie. So that quotation that, if a lie saves innocent lives, you lie. And then, very important, you face the consequences. Why? Because to save the life, if you have to face the consequences of the lie, you face it. That's very important. Not that you now get away with facing the consequences of a lie because it was to save a life. That doesn't happen, right? You get the consequences of saving a life, but you also get the consequences of a lie, and that's how it works. And that is exactly Yudhishthira knows how to do that. Now, two things here. There's two versions of this that I have read. One version says, Yudhishthira immediately 100% believed in Krishna and followed suit. However, most version says Yudhishthira hesitates to lie because he has never lied in his whole life. How cool is Yudhishthira? He must be like 80 years old at this point, and he hasn't told a single lie his entire life. And so just that hard for him to lie. So he hesitates. Even though Krishna is 100% correct, to save hundreds of innocent lives, you have to lie. So Dronacharya looks at Yudhishthira and says, is it true? Is Ashwatthama dead? And Yudhishthira says, Ashwatthama, the elephant, is dead. But when he says the elephant, he lowered his voice, and Bhim knew Yudhishthira is not capable of lying. So Bhim made lots of noise. And so the elephant bit wasn't heard. But Yudhishthira had intention of deceiving Drona into believing Ashwatthama is dead, and so it's considered a lie. And so Drona thinks it must be true. If Yudhishthira has said it, it must be true. This is, when somebody is as honest as Yudhishthira, you believe them. And that's why Krishna had said, It's only you now, Yudhisthira, who can save us from Drona. So Drona sits down and goes into a meditative state. And the way he dies is beautiful, considering that he's really not one of the most beautiful characters in the Mahabharata, because his weaknesses are quite detrimental to the livelihood of those people around him. His death is beautiful because he sits down in the middle of the battlefield, he clears his mind, and he focuses on Vishnu, Krishna. And he chooses where he wants to go in terms of which heaven. We don't even know all the heavens. He chooses where he wants to go, and he wills his pranas out of his body, and he goes straight to where he wants to go, all the time thinking of Vishnu, which this in itself shows you how powerful his mind is. Like, it's so sad that he had that lapse of wanting to have revenge and power, that because actually so powerful is his mind. So powerful are all our minds, because if you think about it, right, so far, like even Jayadratha, who's so annoying, so powerful that he had got that boon and he had that effect on that one day. Like how, like it's not just one person whose mind is so powerful. You can have such a powerful mind. Each and every one of us can have such a powerful mind. So here he is, he's willed his pranas to leave his body. So effectively, he's already dead. Very few people can see this. Very few people can see that his pranas have already left his body and he's already no longer in his body. Karna can see it, interestingly. Maybe because Karna's next and he himself is so close to death. Krishna, of course, can see it. There's one other person who could see it, Kripacharya. Kripacharya is as trained as a guru as Dronacharya. They both taught the Pandavas and Kauravas. So Kripacharya could also see it. But now Drishtadimnu, if you all remember Drishtadimnu, he's the son of Drupata, who was born out of the fire for the sole purpose of killing Drona. Sees him sitting on the battlefield in meditative mode. So he has put his arms down, and then this is what was needed. Drishtadimnu slices off his head. Now, just before he's about to slice off his head, Arjuna screams, "No!" Because one, his body is already, his soul has already left his body. And don't do it so violently and ungracefully, right? He's our guru. You want to kill, but it doesn't have to be so like disrespectful and this. But Drishtadimnu was born for that purpose, and it's war, and he does it. And then, of course, he takes the head, and this is, again, very disrespectful. The rejoicing, like when they killed Abhimanyu, and they rejoiced, for Drishtadimnu to rejoice to kill Drona. It's distasteful. Like, in a battle, you have to kill someone, but then respect for the person's life that they lived, and also respect that now that they are dead, let's, we wish them well. But Drishtadimnu wasn't. And, just that morning, this is day 15, Drona had killed Drishtadimnu's father and son within a span of 1 hour. So Drishtadimnu is also on his own emotional turmoil. And so if he acts this way, then, and so it's so interesting that each one of us is responding to our own emotions, right? Drishtadimnu is responding to his grief and his hate and his need for revenge. And Drona was filled with his anger for himself, for Duryodhana, for life. And Arjuna here is disturbed to see that this is, and even Yudhishtira. Yudhishtira understood that Drona had to be killed. Yudhishtira had no regret that he listened to Krishna and he did what he needed to do, but he thought it was distasteful that they cut the head off and then they rejoicing and all of that, and then they throwing the head. I think they threw the head and Anyway, the whole Kaurava army is horrified because Drona is quite a larger than life figure, and he's the head. And for him to be killed in this such a distasteful way, they genuinely mourning. Duryodhana is distraught. He can't believe this has happened. When Bhishmacharya fell, Duryodhana couldn't believe it. And when Dronacharya now is killed, Duryodhana can't believe it. It's like all his nightmares are coming true. Like everything they told him would come true is coming true. Bhishma told him this would happen. Drona told him this would happen. Vidur told him this will happen. And now that it's happening, he feels he is living a nightmare. And interesting again, when we close to our death, we have incredible moments of clarity. And so Duryodhana has these incredible moments of clarity where he thinks, this is the result of my karma. Great men like my Guru Drona have fallen because of my own greed, my own delusion. I wasn't able to protect the people that I was meant to protect. Instead, I have sacrificed them for my own desires. I think this is such a beautiful moment of clarity for Duryodhana to have. But it's almost like when we have these moments of clarity, it's so crucial that we act on them. Otherwise, what's the point of having them? And Duryodhana does not act on these moments of clarity. They're fleeting, to say the least. But it always amazes me that he has them, because that again shows us proof of divinity it's unbiased. Like for Duryodhana to have these moments of clarity is grace. And he could have acted on these moments of clarity. So grace is there even in the worst of people, and it's even in the worst of situations, even in the most horrendous of horrendous hearts, grace is there. And so there's always that hope, or there's always that chance, there's always that choice. Unfortunately, Duryodhana doesn't use that choice. Although already now we're on day 15 and not much more to go. So at this point, when Drona has been defeated, Arjuna now goes into this, it's not fair. He should not have been killed like that. You used a lie to kill him. Never mind the Kaurava saying that, huh? Yudhishtira, Arjuna is saying it. And it is at this point that there's this huge dialogue between Bhima and Arjuna about dharma. And this is where you see that Bhima, in all his simplicity, is incredibly clear on what is dharma. And so the first thing Bhima says is, as a Kshatriya, when you have to fight in a war, whoever is standing against you is your enemy and you kill. You don't sit there thinking he was my guru, he was this, he was this. This is a fight. If he's your opponent, you have to act as in accordance with the law, and that's Kshatriya Dharma. So Arjuna, you have failed as a Kshatriya. Yeah. Which is true. Krishna himself told Arjuna that when he had to fight Bhishma Pitama, but he rose to the occasion and he did it. And here, to be fair to Arjuna, he did fight Drona, but he didn't have to fight he didn't want to use a lie to kill Dronacharya. And was the lie necessary? It's so hard to know, because yes, the rishis appeared in the sky and told Drona, time's up, but he hadn't quite given up yet. He was still fighting. Even after the rishis appeared in the sky and told him your time's up, he was still fighting. And actually, this was an important point, and I don't want to forget to say this. He then reached out for a celestial weapon yet again to fight, even after they told him this is unbecoming, stop it. And the celestial weapons no longer responded to him. He could no longer wield them. Why? Because he had abused them. He was using them on innocent people. And so now It's almost like the rishis appeared and they took away that power of his to be able to command celestial weapons, but he still had enough skill to fight. So he was still fighting and killing people. And then he heard Ashwatthama is dead. He was still killing people. Then only after some thought, when he looked up at Yudhishthira and asked Yudhishthira the question, did he sit down? So was the lie necessary? Until he looked at Yudhishthira, he didn't stop fighting. Was it the last straw on the camel's back? Maybe. It was the only thing that made him put down the weapons. Was it the only thing that killed him? No. His whole life brought him to this point. It wasn't Yudhishthira's lie that killed him. It was his own anger at Duryodhana, his own anger at himself, his own disappointment that he gave into greed. The rishis telling him, enough, it's your time. All of it added up. It wasn't just Yudhishthira's lie that killed him. But it was the last straw. Now, when Yudhishthira says this lie, Yudhishthira's chariot never actually touched the ground. His chariot used to be 3 inches off the ground, 4 inches off the ground. And apparently Yudhishthira himself never touched the ground. Because he had just lived such an exceptionally pure life. And it is said that the moment he says Ashwatthama is dead, his chariot falls to the ground. From that day onwards, Yudhishthira's chariot no longer floats. And everyone says it's because he lied. So the first adharma he does, the chariot falls. Which it's true. The minute you've lied, you've broken your vow of satya. Although it is also said that it wasn't the lie that made his chariot fall. Because the lie in accordance to dharma, and it wasn't breaking dharma, because it was saving lives. It was also an instruction from Krishna. And so to follow it is dharma. It was Yudhishthira's hesitation that made the chariot fall. And I found this so interesting because it's true up till now when you read, Yudhishthira has no hesitation in anything that Krishna said was true. Anything that Krishna said, he did. And it's even though it's Krishna saying it, Yudhishthira hesitates. And maybe it's just force of habit. You know, it's not even that he wanted to. It's just that when you're so used to doing something that not doing it really, you falter a little bit. But it was really interesting that that's what one of the commentators, right, that it's his hesitation to listen explicitly is what makes his chariot fall. So his fall wasn't the line. It was the doubting of shoulda. I don't know which one it is. Both could be possible reasons, but it is at this point where his chariot now touches the ground like everybody else's chariot, and he too touches the ground like everybody else. So in a way, this event is very humbling to Yudhishthira. So Bhim has this argument about what is dharma. So firstly, it was Kshatriya dharma is if he's your opponent, you fight. Then Bhim said, secondly, you might say this lie is a dharma. But what about the game of dice? Does this lie not pale in comparison to the adharma that was done at the game of dice? How can you fault Yudhishthira or Krishna for this lie now when it's combating the adharma that was done at the game of dice? And then, even though, but he says, firstly, the lie is not a dharma because it's to save people. But even if you consider it a lie, what's the adharma of this lie compared to the adharma that was done at the game of dice? And then immediately he says, and you, Arjuna, of all people, how can you forget? Maybe you have forgotten what happened to Draupadi at the game of dice, although none of us should. How can you forget what they did to Abhimanyu just 3 days ago? Yeah. When somebody fights with that kind of disregard for the rules, how can the rules then protect them? The rules no longer protect them. How can you expect us to adhere to rules that no longer protect them and no longer protect us? And so Bhim's argument is so clear. And so on no account is this lie a dharma. Yeah. And it's Bhim that's talking. And then Arjuna, it was grief. Arjuna had genuine affection for Dronacharya as guru. And so he was grieving his guru's death, which he himself had to witness, which wouldn't have been pleasant. And so he said that comment. And then it was against, interesting, he criticized Yudhishthira. Like initially when Krishna made the suggestion, he was horrified at Krishna. Like, Krishna, how can you? But when it comes to it, the blame is on Yudhishthira. But Yudhishthira, you lied, like you caused our guru's death. And so you hear this Bhim now defend and praise Yudhishthira. And it's like, Bhim himself has insulted Yudhishthira at least a gazillion times, but nobody else is allowed to, including his own brother Arjuna, is not allowed to say a word against Yudhishthira, because now the amount Bhim praises Yudhishthira is wow. And how Yudhishthira is the epitome of Dharma. He really is Dharma incarnate. And actually, Yudhishthira is very often called Dharmaraj, king of Dharma, because he really did live Dharma. And Yudhishthira listening to Bhim praise him is so overwhelmed. It's it's incredibly sweet. These few moments here and there that we have in the Mahabharata war. There's like all these horrendous moments, but some moments that are just so incredibly. The reliance that Yudhishthira has on Bhim is, in a way, so much stronger than his reliance to Arjuna, because just before he takes and not doing a good job, let's go. He has to face probably the hardest decision that, after fighting this war, the fight itself was the hardest decision that Yudhishthira had to make. But after making that decision, this would have been one of the hardest decisions Yudhishthira would have had to make, which is to lie. Bhim supports him, 100%. Of course, Krishna is supporting him, but it's Bhim who's so vocal about it. And Krishna too looks at Arjuna and says, you're letting your grief be better of you. Arjuna, use your head. Stop thinking wishment. And this is Arjuna's biggest flaw, which is why he's the perfect student for the Bhagavad Gita. What's his biggest flaw? Attachment. He was too attached to Bhishma. He was too attached to Drona. And so he can't think straight. And why does that make him a good student? For the Bhagavad Gita? Because that's our biggest flaws. We attached. We attached to wanting things as certain. to particular people. And we act so differently depending on who we are with. Okay? And so we're going to see this now. So when Drona dies, Karna is made commander-in-chief of the Kaurava army. Now, when Bhishma was made commander of chief, every few hours, Karna would say, "You're not doing a good job. This is terrible. How could you? You were weak." He was sympathizing with the. When Drona was the not only it was personal. It was, you suck because you are Brahmana, you don't have the good skills as a chef. It was all these horrible taunts. Now Karna becomes commander-in-chief, and Duryodhana doesn't say a word. Not a single word. When Bhishma was commander-in-chief, Duryodhana was, "I want the kingdom, I want the kingdom, I want the kingdom." When Drona was the commander-in-chief, Duryodhana kept saying, "I want the kingdom, I want." Now Karna becomes commander-in-chief, and he doesn't say, "I want the kingdom." After day 15 is over at night, he gives Karna a hug and says, "Everyone did their best. Let's try better tomorrow." Well, why hasn't he said this for the last 14 days? Bhishma would say this, Drona would say this, but Duryodhana never said this. And suddenly Karna becomes commander-in-chief, and this is what Duryodhana says. Attachment. Look how different we are when it's attachment. Fair to Arjuna, he wasn't ruthless or cold or to anyone. Even when he was outraged after Abhimanyu's death, he still fought with a lot of dignity to all his elders. Only person that Arjuna is a little bit ungraceful with is Karna. But otherwise, he remains very good as a warrior. But again, this is attachment. Why is he so ungraceful to? He could be so nice to Drona, even though Drona's on the other side, but he couldn't be so nice to Karna. This is that quality that makes us so. What's the word? Makes us not able to see clearly. That's attachment, right? It's at Bhajagovindam we have Satsangatva Nisangatvam, Nisangatva Nirmohatvam. With satsang, you get detachment. With detachment, you get clear thinking. This is how we lift ourselves. But when it's not detachment, when it's attachment, our thinking's foggy, clouded. Like today's weather. What was with today's weather? Our thinking becomes like that, right? Like so. Like literally sticky, right? This humidity was so bad today. When I woke up in the morning, you couldn't see the harbor. Usually it's such a beautiful, clear view of the harbor. It was all so foggy. So that's attachment. It blurs, it clouds. It doesn't allow clarity. So this debate is happening between Arjuna and Bhim and this whole topic of dharma. Yudhishthira's chariot has fallen to the ground. Dronacharya is dead, even though he had willed himself to leave the body, and he has already reached the heavens. They even say that, He reached where he set out to go. So he's reached there's a special heaven for warriors to go, where they can all hang out together and praise each other. That was a good fight. So he goes up to that heaven. Now, the Kaurava army is distraught. Everybody is running away after seeing Drona's death. And Ashwatthama sees all the Kauravas running and says, what went wrong? Why? Why is this happening? A parable would cause this kind of a reaction. And Duryodhana has to tell him. that his father was killed, and he was killed in this way. And so now Ashwatthama is filled with this incredible sense of anger and regret and wanting vengeance. And so this is a common theme that we keep seeing in the Mahabharata. Vengeance leads to an action, and then that action will lead the other person to want vengeance. So Drona wanted vengeance on Drupada, conquered the kingdom. Then Drupada wanted vengeance on Drona, gave birth to Drishtadyumna. Now Drishtadyumna has killed Drona in this horribly ugly way, and so now Drupada's vengeance is got through Drishtadyumna. Now Ashwatthama wants vengeance on Drishtadyumna and the Pandavas at large. So wanting vengeance is a never ending. This is even like so many stories, right? So Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is this exact same thing. Wanting vengeance, this feud that goes on between the Montagues and the Capulets. And when does it end? It ended with Romeo and Juliet both being killed, dying senselessly. So senseless. Like really so senseless. Juliet is 16. Romeo is what, 18, 19? So young. Killed just because the families don't like each other. And so, I mean, most people think Romeo and Juliet is the love story between the two of them. But if you actually read Romeo and Juliet, they couldn't have possibly loved each other. They hardly met, like 2 days, 3 days. It's not even, they couldn't, how could it have been such a huge romance? It's just, they had one dance together at one party. I don't know if you all know the story. And then the rest of it was them trying to figure out how to be with each other, but they weren't actually with each other. So I can't understand how it can be such an epic love story. The whole story is really about the feud stopped because they both died. And take something like that to make people realize that how long is it going to go on for? And yet we haven't learned, because you see, it keeps going. India, Pakistan keeps going. But when's it going to stop? Who's going to say enough? Both have to at some point say enough, right? Somebody has to stop wanting revenge. And that's with so many so many borders where this fighting keeps going on. So many families where this fighting keeps going on. Which brothers? 2 cousins. So futile. Revenge is so futile, and it's a never-ending cycle. No dharma can happen when that's our motivation, when revenge is our motivation. We will pause here. So day 15 is now over. Karna has been made commander-in-chief. Day 16 is when another very big event will happen. Remember, the war is 18 days, so we're close to the end. Any questions? Yeah.
So, Arjuna questioned Yudhishtira, why did you do this? Why did you?
Arjuna questioned Yudhishtira, why did you lie?
That was out of grievances because
Arjuna was grieving.
The fact that he questioned. But initially, the way that they reacted, so the way that he and Arjuna reacted to Dronacharya as their guru, how he was like, "You're not my guru anymore. I'm honest to you." But Arjuna went around him and respected him. So, what was the harming way?
So her question is that Arjuna still considered Drona a guru, and on not day 15, but on day 14 he had done pradakshina, and Bhim didn't. She's asking which is the right way to behave. I think both were fine. So this is another thing. There's dharma and there's swadharma. Right? And swadharma also counts for a lot. So Arjuna's Swadharma, like I said, he wasn't ungraceful with anyone except for Karna. Arjuna is pretty respectful to everyone. Um, even when Arjuna had to fight all the other people in the Kaurava army, he does it very gracefully, nicely. He's generally respectful, generally on the side of polite, on the side of kinder, and true to what things is, right? So even earlier in the Mahabharata, he wouldn't break rules easily, and if punishment was needed, then he adhered to the punishment. Even when he went to other kingdoms, and if he had gotten married, and their custom or their ritual, he adhered to it. Even when he goes up to heaven and Urvashi, that whole incident, he tends to be more respectful. He was actually being respectful to Urvashi, saying, no, I won't take advantage of you. And she's like, but I want you. So Arjuna's Swadharma is one that he would be respectful. So he did pranams to Dronacharya. And Bhim's Swadharma is Bhim was blunt and very much in the moment, and his loyalties were very clear. And in Bhim's heart, you're no longer my guru. And you didn't stand up for Draupadi. I won't respect you means I won't respect you. So I don't think there's a right and a wrong. I think the dharma is right now that Arjuna need not have bowed down, because he's an opponent in war and you're my enemy. But there was no harm in bowing down, because Arjuna stayed true to the fact that he fought with all his might. Right? In the Chakra view, he didn't fight because it was wasting time, and he wouldn't have been able to win. But on day 15, he actually fights, and he puts up a good fight, like not a half-hearted fight. Actually puts up, but Drona couldn't be defeated. But he fought true to Kshatriya Dharma. So he stayed true to Kshatriya Dharma in fighting Drona, and he stayed true to his Swadharma in being respectful. And Bhim too stayed true to Kshatriya Dharma in fighting whoever was in front of him. He also stayed true to his Swadharma. That way he didn't no longer saw respect. So I think both need to be taken into account. We do follow our Swadharma as well. Like even something as a teacher, I have my Swadharma as a teacher, somebody else has their Swadharma as a teacher, and we true to it. In an adult class, it doesn't matter as much, but sometimes when I'm training people to take a class, my Swadharma is a little bit cheekier. Other people can't be quite as cheeky as me and get away with it. Even I don't get away with it sometimes, but it's my Swadharma. Yeah, answered? Question answered? What Bhim said is revenge? Yeah. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. Bhim also wanted revenge for Draupadi's insult. So there's a difference here. Bhim wanted justice for an unjust act. Whereas wanting revenge is, you hurt me, so I want to hurt you. So even though it hurt Bhim, It was still an actual injustice the way Draupadi was treated. And so he wanted justice. So it's slightly different. So now Drona being killed in a war, this is a war. People are going to get killed. Wanting revenge for that is personal. It's not an injustice. In a war, when the rules are broken, you can no longer follow it. For us, that doesn't apply. We are not in a war. So, for us, we have to say the truth. Krishna is there. Yeah. Krishna is not here telling us what to do. Yeah, you're right. We have to, as scriptures say, and work it out for ourselves. Yeah. We may make mistakes. You're right. We may make mistakes. They had it easier. They had Krishna actually there telling them what to do. I agree. So unfair. Where's this Krishna? No, you're right. You're right. I mean, we have people who can guide us, but yeah, they're not with us every moment of every day. And so we have to learn to make the decision ourselves. That's the journey, right? To be able to hear Krishna within our hearts. Harder for us. Arjuna, Yudhishtira had it easy. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.